Every so often we need to rewrite some part of history, because things are never quite the way they seem to be at the time. The records we usually hold as the truth are always tinted by the eye of the beholder. No amount of research can ever fully recover the events that we are so sure to have led us to where we are today, but we can at least try. Today we will try to discover what really hides behind the lingering sounds of the battle wagon, driven by what seems to be a mystery driver, which still mark the day of the 1st of April in 1920. For this, we need to rewrite the events that took place around the French village of Corby outside of Amiens about 2 years prior. On the 21st of April 1918, Rittmeister Baron Manfred von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron, was caught in the crossfire of Australian machine gunners on the ground in the Sopwith Camel of Captain Roy Brown. The Baron's Red Fokker triplane inevitably crash-landed almost intact in a sugar beet field outside the St. Colette brickworks, where the first arriving soldiers claim that the pilot was still alive but fatally wounded. Ever since the soldiers first laid hand on his dying body, there have been endless debates over which bullet actually killed the Red Baron. Was it one from an Australian handheld Lewis gun, or one from Roy Brown's Vickers machine guns? It seemed that this question would remain unanswered for the rest of time, but again, we are not here to retell, we are here to rewrite, which is why this question is not the right one for our purpose. After their discovery, the wreck and body were transported to the British aerodrome at Poulainville, where the plane arrived substantially savaged by trophy hunters. Our historical records indicate that von Richthofen's dead body was superficially cleaned up in the evening of April 21st in order to be buried with full military honors at the nearby cemetery of Bertangles the next day. It is also stated that the body was transferred there in the afternoon of April 22nd. Now, two minor pieces of these informations are inaccurate. Number 1. The body was actually transferred to Bertangles and secretly laid out in a local chapel the night before the official ceremony, because the commanding officer at Poulainville was afraid that trophy hunters might tear apart von Richthofen's corpse, just as they ripped apart the remains of his aeroplane. The afternoon procession of April 22nd therefore carried an empty coffin. Number 2. The Red Baron was not actually dead. He, in fact, was in a state of shock coma when he was left in the chapel. By all the means available to the military medics in charge, von Richthofen had been fatally wounded and showed no signs of life. Modern medical equipment, though, would have been able to show that minimal cerebral activity, a faint pulse and a heartbeat of 2 to 3 strokes per minute was keeping the former terror of the western skies called corpse alive. There is absolutely no doubt that the Baron's wounds were so bad that no matter how much or how little vitality was left in that cold body of his, he would inevitably die within a matter of hours rather than days. Even if the fact of his being alive had been discovered at Poulainville, the only change in history would have been his time of death by at most a single day. So why bother digging up and exposing the false records held on this man? Indeed, Manfred von Richthofen, as we know him, was stone dead by the time his funeral was held in the afternoon of April 22nd, 1918. Killed, however, not by an Australian or British bullet, but by the only creature capable of grasping the transitional nature of his state during that night in the chapel. A vampire, secretly occupying the small catacombs during daylight and out predating at night. The hidden creature had smelled von Richthofen's blood, taken advantage of the prey that was basically laid out on his dinner table, and drained the little that was left within the dying Baron. Vampires had somewhat of a free pass during the final year of the Great War. Everybody else was so occupied with the terrors of war that the vampire's activity was hardly noticed at all. Most of the deaths caused by their bites were attributed either to shrapnel or the Spanish flu, since most victims of vampire bites actually show very similar symptoms to the flu. very high fever, a heavy cough, and finally, suffocation. The virus that makes vampires what they are kills most of their victims, within a few hours. Some, however, although clinically dead, live on forever as creatures of the night themselves. Only men and women of noble blood, with a keen hunting instinct and unafraid of death, can resurrect during this painful transformation process. Although fatally wounded, the Red Baron met all of these criteria. This means that the Red Baron was in fact killed during the war, but the human remains that were buried at Bertangles on April 22, 1918, served as a host for a new creature to rise in its own time. Since the substantial wounds von Richthofen's body were marked with during his last combat slowed down the transformation process substantially, it ended up taking almost a full year before all the marks of war were removed from the Baron's body. Hidden in the tombs of Bertangles, the new life the Baron had gained grew in strength until he had finally enough to awake. The same body, but inhabited by something else. After draining innocent blood from farm animals to gain more strength, the dead Baron's first excursions were in the greater Amiens area, where he frantically collected the remains of his Red Fokker triplane. He killed the collectors and trophy hunters that were in possession of what he was searching for as soon as he found them. In a Ford Model T, which he had stolen from British troops monitoring the armistice, he transported everything he could get his hands on to a secret vault in an abandoned castle deep inside the forests around Saint-Gobain. The freshly arisen creature had no memory of the body's former life. The vampire within the Red Baron was acting purely on instinct when he, strangely enough, made plans to rebuild an aeroplane from all the scrap he had collected. Somehow, however, he realized that he needed his victims' fresh blood much more than simply the pleasure of their peril. Suddenly, chasing them on the ground seemed to make much more sense than shooting them from the skies. The plan for a fast battle wagon was born. His stolen Model T had proven to be a strong and sturdy enough base to take the abuse that comes with man-hunting, but it was awfully slow. Tuning the car's engine made it faster, and only the addition of the old triplane's rotary engine made the difference the revenge-lusting Baron was looking for. Aligning all the necessary bits and pieces took him another year, but then, on April 1st, 1920, not long after dusk, the mighty roar of the dead Baron's battle wagon was heard for the first time on the outskirts of Foulambray. And this is the story of how the dead Baron was born.